Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 16 of The Mountains We Climb. In each episode, we'll be diving into the mind of someone who has overcome significant challenge and adversity in their life so that we as the listener can see what is really possible and what it really takes. I'm your host, Jordan Kilpatrick Smith, and today we're going to be exploring the journey of Gabe Bronner, who went from dealing with chronic GI pain, fatigue, and mental health issues to finally finding health and balance. Just as a reminder, each episode is done live, so if you'd like to join us and ask your own questions and be a part of our discussion, you can do so on YouTube and Facebook. Gabe, thank you so much for being here with me.
Thanks for having me.
So where does your story start?
Sure. So I like to think it starts when I'm about 15, 16. I'm in school. Basically wasn't going too well academically. This is kind of where I see the focal point of where everything just kind of starts rolling in a negative way, bad and negative way, and kind of one thing after the next. I was kind of diagnosed, quote unquote, with ADHD when I was 9, 10. I think that's a lot of kids are diagnosed this thing. It's a very generalized kind of diagnosis. Encompasses a bunch of things. I basically couldn't sit still, was raising my hand a bunch, running around. I was, in my opinion, a normal kid with a lot of energy.
Right.
Yeah. So basically, I went to my physician and he said, my grades weren't going great. I was 14, 15. People were thinking about college. The weight of college, in the United States, I know you're in Canada, maybe the system's a little different, but in the United States, there's a lot of pressure to perform and to, go to college, and a good college at that. A lot of competition out there. And so I saw my friends looking at these schools that I wasn't going to get into, right, given my grades. And so I basically went to my physician and said, what can I do? And he prescribed me amphetamine salts, Adderall, essentially.
Right.
Very powerful stuff. So basically that's, in my opinion, when things kind of went downhill. So I started taking this medication prescribed by a doctor. Amphetamine salts. It's Adderall, but it says amphetamine salts on the bottle. I just remember it so vividly. Yeah. What a creepy thing to say on the bottle, right? And I'm a 14, 15-year-old. And listen, everyone's body is different, right? Everyone's brain chemistry is different. Some people take them, they're okay, right? Some people take them, it's helped some people. I believe. I'm not here to say that it hasn't helped people. I'm very sensitive to uppers, it turns out. Even caffeine, even nicotine, any kind of stimulants. Very, very sensitive. And so throw like a serious stimulant in there and it's like, oof. So basically I started taking this stuff and it was just kind of a mess. And I was very, very anxious, very, very anxious. And that's when kind of the GI symptoms started occurring, the stomach stuff.
So yeah. What was it like? What was your first experience with Adderall? Like, did you have any preconceived notions about what it was before you took it? Or was it like, oh, a doctor gave me this pill, I guess I'll take it? So
great question. So I did see some success from my friends who were taking it. And also my first experience basically was when I took it, it was like, oh my God, this is amazing type thing.
Yeah. In what way?
So I felt good. Okay. And I was performing very well academically. Very, very well. My grades went from, C's on average to really A's, and school became very, very easy for me. But everything else kind of deteriorated emotionally and socially in a sense. So is it true that Adderall just, it makes you really focused? Was that what it did? It just made you focused and then school became easier? So yeah, it seemed so. I remember actually what I was prescribed was dextroamphetamines specifically, which are, very, very powerful things. I mean, just like I remember taking them, feeling high, feeling good, feeling like really good. And yeah, and I essentially felt extremely stimulated and very, very focused, but everything else kind of fell apart. I wasn't sleeping. I was becoming isolated socially, emotionally. I was so anxious that I was numb almost. Yeah. So, and feel free to jump in at any time, but I, remember basically it went well for 6 months, right? 6 months to a year. So 10th grade, I believe. I did really well academically. And then I just like, even after taking the medication, year 2, my grades started going down actually again. So because everything was just a mess in my life. Socially, I was isolated from my friends. I was getting in fights for weird reasons. I don't know why. I was angry. I was quiet. I was not myself at all. And I felt this. I felt like I wasn't myself. And I was confused. And I think my family was confused and my friends were confused as well. But I think my family chalked it up to adolescence, as they do. Right. So I actually, I ended up moving schools actually to a private school. The truth is I wanted to move because the social situation wasn't good for me anymore. There was an issue with my friends in high school, and there's a large group of friends, and this whole thing. And my parents thought I wanted to move schools because I wanted to better my future, right? So I kind of masked it in this explanation that I wanted to move schools because I, wanted to get into a better college and go to a private boarding school because that can tend to help, college-wise. Yeah, but that's when the GI stuff really started, actually. That's when it really kind of kicked off.
When you switched schools?
Just when the stimulants started happening. The school switching, definitely. It was my first time that I actually went to the ER when I went to that school, the private boarding school. Even though it was 20 minutes away, they wanted me to board because they got more money out of it, in my opinion. Yeah. The capitalism, it's okay. Welcome to America. But so basically, I ended up going to the emergency room for like stomach stuff, and I was super skinny, and it was like, I was a mess.
Can you tell me like what stomach stuff, like more specifically, like pain? Was it diarrhea? Was it bloating? What were you experiencing?
Sure, yeah. It was pain. It was nausea. It was just a really, really tight stomach. I just wasn't eating. But just nausea. I'm just kind of throwing up and couldn't stop throwing up, that kind of thing. So I'm sure it was a lot of, psychosomatic stuff. My theory has always been that the Adderall use, the use of the amphetamines and the stimulants, kind of brought out this celiacness in me because my body was under so much stress. That's my theory, right? There's obviously an unconfirmed thing, but it's just, it all kind of happened at the same time. And that was just under, your body's under so much stress. What I've read and what I've heard and learned about a little bit is that, environment can bring out various genetic, autoimmune issues for various people under, copious amounts of stress, right? So that's when everything kind of really kicked off. Yeah, essentially.
Yeah, and I want to come back to that near closer to the end and talk about what is celiac and how do we understand it. But okay, totally. So you went to the ER, you got into this boarding school, you're on amphetamines, you go to the ER, you're the skinny kid, and what happens there? Yeah, so,
not a big deal. I mean, not a big deal it wasn't like they thought it was they mostly thought it was anxiety, right? So what happened was I was seeing a psychiatrist for the stimulants and basically telling him I'm depressed, I'm isolated, I'm anxious, right? And he just gives me another medication, Paxil, I remember I think it was Paxil, which is an anti-anxiety medication. And I think this is a very common occurrence that occurs with adolescents especially, and this kind of medication vicious cycle that they'll get into, right? Give one medication for one symptom, mask it with another medication. I don't know how it is now. I'm sure it's still relatively prevalent. I do work at a psych hospital. I see a lot of medication. And so, that's essentially what happened. He gave me Paxil and Xanax, I believe, about those benzos. And it was just made me worse.
In what way?
I was just more numb. It was just, So it was I was numbingly anxious, but now numbingly numb, if that makes sense.
Right.
Just double numbed. So it was a weird time, man. I was pretty disassociated, I would say. And I knew internally that I'm, not like this, right? I'm pretty outgoing dude, pretty happy guy, like to make friends, like to talk to people. So this kind of internal, stir up that was going on. And I'm pretty sure that the symptoms of celiac were starting to occur as well. So I had all this stuff going on internally. It was just an internal war, essentially, in my body and brain as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And what was that like for you being roughly 16? You're in high school. You're at this boarding school. There's all this pressure on you. And you're just totally numbed from medication? Like, how do you socialize? How do you make friends? How do you focus on school? How did you?
Yeah, man. I mean, yeah, absolutely. You do your best to adjust, make a couple friends, be as, play lacrosse. I, tried to kind of keep myself structured in that sense. But I was a mess, honestly. I was a little confused. I was, not in a good place, and I was seeking answers. I was just like, what's going on here, and I think I was just too young to kind of understand that I was in this pickle, kind of, and understand how I can get out of it. And the way you can get out of it, step one is stopping medication, at least, the Adderall specifically, which I eventually did at age 18. Yeah, it was rough. I ended up, being at that school for a year and then moving back to public school because I wasn't happy at that private school. And I knew it was costing, lots of money. A private school in the States is as expensive as colleges. So
Wow.
Yeah, it was, 45, 50 grand a year or something. And, we're not rich by any means, we're fine, but we're not, I think they took out loans. I mean, they were doing my parents were super supportive and as much as they could be, but they, also were confused. So yeah, and it wasn't, I ended up going to the ER a couple more times as well, I believe, for the same kind of symptoms. So.
And in the States, if you're on these medications and you're going to the ER, like each one of those is a lot of money, right? Like that's, you don't.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was, we had insurance, right? My father's insurance. Gotcha. He worked for the New York Times at the time. We were okay, but absolutely, if you end up going to the ER a bunch of times and you don't have insurance, or you don't have good insurance, yeah, it's expensive. The psychiatrist is expensive. Yeah, the medical stuff was not free.
Right.
That's for sure. Yeah, no question. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, basically, I went back to public school. I went, I was like, this private school thing isn't for me. I want to go back to public school. Went back to public school. So basically all my friends had graduated. They had graduated the year before, because what happens, it's kind of a weird thing. If you're in 10th grade in high school and you want to go to 11th grade at a boarding private school, they ask you to repeat a year. So I did 11th grade, twice. I did once at public school and then once at private school.
Right.
And then so I did it twice, and then I went back and I only had half a year, essentially 6 months. I finished public school, and yeah, it was just kind of a weird time. Things weren't going as planned, and yeah, basically I ended up moving to Israel when I was 18. My folks moved there. My mom's Israeli. My father's a journalist. My father got a job, the big position for the paper there, and so he took it. It was good for his career. My brother was in college. I decided to go to Israel as opposed to going to college because I knew that I wasn't going to end up at a good college, and I felt like this is going to be a waste of time, waste of money if I go college and spend 400 grand on college. So I went to Israel and I stopped the Adderall, but my stomach symptoms were still extremely present.
Which was what? What were you experiencing?
Totally, yeah. I was experiencing just in pain. My stomach, I was in pain 24 hours. My stomach was always hurting, right? So it was in constant stomach ache, essentially. I was always feeling something in here in my stomach. On top of that, I was very out of it, very fatigued. Not myself, we can dive into the science of celiac, but briefly, as far as I could tell, it was affecting my neurology, my personality, my neurology, my neurotransmitters, they would say, serotonin, dopamine, all these things, which are kind of, according to, theories out there, 90% of our neurotransmitters are produced in our gut, right? Yeah. Yeah. So, you have a crappy gut, it's just going to communicate to your brain, that it's so basically I felt like if this was off, right?
Yeah, well they're starting to realize it's kind of like a second brain. It's like its own system, the gut health.
Completely.
Okay.
Yeah, completely. Absolutely.
And so at no point here was anyone like, hey, maybe it's something that you're eating that's causing all of this stomach issue?
Great question, man. Yeah, no. I mean, so, I was in Israel, right? So it's kind of a holistic approach to things. I think is more of a recent thing. I think it's more in the last kind of decade that people have kind of, if you're having some kind of sickness, illness, something going, let's think about your diet first. That's kind of the holistic approach that's kind of catching on now.
Mm-hmm.
But I was still completely in the Western medicine box when I was in Israel. And no, it was mostly, and also because I was feeling so physiologically depressed, my complaints to doctors or anybody in the world, it was, I'm depressed, right? So it was, oh, you have depression, or you have anxiety. Usually those are kind of bunched in too, even though I was like, I don't feel anxious because I'm tired. I'm not anxious. I'm just depressed. I'm just tired. I'm just depressed and out of it. And it was a very physiological sensation. I remember having arguments with a psychiatrist who was supposed to be this prominent psychiatrist who ran the psych unit in Jerusalem. Jerusalem hospital is a famous hospital in Jerusalem. I forgot what it's called, but she was the head of the department there, and she was American, so it kind of worked out for me. My Hebrew wasn't amazing, and we basically had these weird arguments about me talking about how my depression felt physical and chemical in nature, and how she said, no, it's environmental, right? And so there was this weird kind of, it was kind of a strange back and forth. And it wasn't just with her, by the way. It was with my folks. It was with lots of, figures of authority on mental health. I would be adamant about the fact that this is a physiological sensation, and I'm like, I know myself, right? Like, I don't feel sad. I would say this specifically. I would say I don't feel sad. I feel depressed, like physically depressed. And I just remember thinking there's a distinction. Like you can be sad about an event, or somebody dying, or which is normal and human, but nothing like that had happened to me. I had a very good life, good parents, not like nothing. I don't feel bad about myself really. I just felt depressed, and just physically, right?
Yeah.
So it was just a very physical sensation.
Yeah, and is it correct? Like, am I hearing you correctly that at no point did someone say, "Hey, you know what? Maybe we should listen to this guy about what his symptoms are"? It was always like, "No, I'm the professional. I know what's going on, and you just listen to me."
Totally. Yeah. So that's absolutely correct. So nobody listened to me.
Yeah.
In that sense, right? They didn't ask me, what are you eating? Maybe something's going on in there. It was usually try another medication, or, another SSRI, or, another approach psychiatrically. So yeah, you would be absolutely correct. Yeah.
What was that like for you? Like, you go in doctor after doctor after doctor, and you're like, no, like listen to me. I'm telling you what's going on, and everyone's like, yeah, whatever. Here's another prescription. Like, what was that like for you? And you just start getting pill after pill after pill.
Yeah, it was very, very frustrating. I felt like a crazy person a little bit. Yeah, the whole term gaslit, in a sense. Obviously like maybe it's not the most appropriate kind of phrase to use in this context, but I felt a little bit like a crazy person, and also I was feeling depressed. So I was like, I get it. I mean, I was also focused on the depression, right? Because I thought maybe if I fix the depression, everything else will kind of, go away. And I was kind of looking at it as this physiological thing, the sickness that was occurring internally. Hello, cat. So yeah, it was very, very, very frustrating, and I was pretty sick. I wasn't doing great, honestly. So it was a mess. Yeah.
Yeah. And then what happened?
So yeah, and then I was in Israel, still not doing well, out of it, not myself, numbed, disassociated, and I went to the military for 18 months, thinking maybe external structure will help the internal structure. It didn't help.
So you're in the military, you're taking all these pills. Are you still numb at this point? Like,
yeah, man. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just not happening for you.
Just not happening for me. Yeah.
And was this the American military, or
no? This is the Israeli military.
Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, it wasn't not an ideal place to be sick. This isn't any kind of military form. But I was also, on my vacation time, I ended up going to the hospital, and they gave me like an epidural in the ER. It was gnarly. Like, it was, because I was having this like stomach, because I was taking SSRIs, and they made me nauseous to the point, because there are serotonin receptors in our gut. And, you know, my experience with SSRIs is every time I take them, I get extremely, extremely nauseous to the point where it's like, I can't control it anymore and I like lose it, right? And that's probably just a me thing. I'm sure other people have experienced nausea, but it turns out I'm very sensitive. My body chemistry is strange. You know, everyone's different. But, you know, yes, I had these like all these like what they would call panic attacks, and I would just say I'm nauseous, right? And the nausea went away, the panic went away. So basically what happened is, so I did the military, did I think 15 months, because I ended up going to the hospital so much. They were like, listen, like you don't need to be here, you know, this is. So I had like a medical discharge or whatever. I was supposed to do a year and a half. I did 14 or 15 months, 2 or 3 months short of, you know, finishing my, you know, half service. It's 3 years for men, 2 years for women. I was going to do half that. And basically I was in Israel and I decided to come back to the States. I wanted to come back to the States. I missed the States. People are a little more polite here. There are more opportunities here. So basically, yeah, I came back. And I went to college for a couple semesters. I was still a mess, by the way. And at this point, I'd actually started taking Effexor, which is an SNRI, a serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor. And actually, I felt that it was helping me because it was like this, it was kind of this energy booster, the norepinephrine aspect of it. Yeah. But the way that I did it was, the way that I got on it, because I'm so sensitive, was I remember we took the capsules and we opened them and we counted each little ball, because there are little balls in each capsule. And I remember, you know, there may be like, I don't know, 40, 50 little balls in each capsule. I took like 1 or 2 the first day, 3, 4 the next day, 5. So just got on so slowly that I was like, okay, I didn't have these like nausea attacks. I was also on the highest dose. I think I was on 300 milligrams, which I don't believe you go any higher than that. I was still feeling horrible, but I was on this medication, and I was, you know, this is where I'm at right now. But came back to the States, and, you know, tried to do some school, didn't really work out. Ended up, you know, doing like a wilderness therapy program, because it's kind of a diagnostic thing, these wilderness therapy programs that are, you know, directed, you know, for adolescents. I was 22 at the time. So I was actually an experimental first adult group for this wilderness therapy program. Did it help? No. They thought I was bipolar. I don't believe I'm bipolar. You know, but yeah, I mean, I was on medication. I was on, you know, Effexor. I was, you know, back in New York. Things were a little calmer. Obviously, I had stopped taking the Adderall. I stopped it at 18. I remember, like, that was a good thing. And by the way, I thought a lot of this stuff was due to the Adderall, right? I thought like all this stuff was like, you know, neurological damage that occurred from all the amphetamines that I had taken.
Right.
Yeah. So that was a, you know, a scare of mine, and no healthcare practitioner could confirm that was a thing, right? Mm-hmm. It's not really something that occurs. And so, yeah, basically I moved to New York City with my folks, and I was 24 at the time. I moved to the East Village with a buddy from high school. Actually started picking up marijuana again for, you know, just helping with the nausea and the anxiety, and it was just a form of self-medication. I was using it very, very heavily. And
it was like hugely illegal at this point still, right?
Hugely is kind of
not true?
No, I mean, it was illegal. It's still illegal in New York, but in New York City, it was pretty easy to get. And it was, I think that it wasn't a big deal. I think that if you were caught smoking a joint or caught with some weed, NYPD has better things to do. So it is, what is it, a class 1, or is it class or?
Schedule 1?
Schedule 1, thank you. Schedule 1, you know, narcotic, which is insane.
Yeah.
In the states federally, right? Obviously state, it varies. But yeah, in New York, it is illegal still. And it was maybe decriminalized at some point. But yeah, it was, when I was doing it, I was 22, 23. Yeah, it was totally technically illegal, and I was getting my marijuana illegally. But there was go on.
The reason I ask is, you know, you were doing it to help with the anxiety. Did that increase the anxiety for you at all?
It didn't really, because culturally, my roommates were smoking, and it was a thing that people do.
Yeah, it was pretty chill.
Exactly, it's chill. Exactly, totally. Yeah, it wasn't like a serious drug that I was concerned about in that sense, like breaking the law in that sense.
Yeah.
It's a good question, but no, I couldn't care less about that. I wasn't really worried. I wasn't dealing it or.
And did it help you?
So I felt like it was helping me, right? I felt like it was relieving my nausea, and so I was basically using it to keep the nausea at bay. And so the way that I was using it was every few hours, right? Just to completely keep the nausea at bay. And if I felt once the high started going away, I used again for the nausea. And so I was kind of hooked on weed, but in my opinion, this is my savior. This is my medicine.
Yeah.
So I felt like it was helping me. I mean, it may have been helping me deal with life, deal with, circumstances, physical pain. Maybe it was making me a little higher functioning potentially. But yeah, I mean, it may have, but I will say that, when the high kind of wore off for me, I would get even more nauseous. So it was like this kind of, hole that I was in almost of self-medicating, and marijuana is pretty strong nowadays. It's even probably stronger nowadays than it was, what was it, 8 years ago, 7 years ago. So, I would say maybe it helped, Yeah,
maybe. But it wasn't like a clear cut, this helps me and now everything is solved.
Correct. It was not a clear cut. It was not a magical. It was not, no. I was under the impression that it kind of was, because I was clinging to it with dear life in a sense, because I was in so much physical nauseous pain, and it was helping me in the moment. Yeah. Long term, what it was doing to me, probably not something good, but that's a me personal thing. Other people are less reactive to these kinds of substances. I've learned that, for me, not taking substances period is kind of the route that I need to go. Right. I'll have a drink here and there, no question, but I like, even like coffee, like I can't drink coffee. Like I only drink coffee if I like haven't slept and I'm at work and like I need something, like, and it's like 4 sips, and then I don't do it 2 days in a row. Like I'm sensitive, like my body's super sensitive.
Yeah. And so at this point, you had been struggling with this psychological and physical torment for 30% of your life. If you're 21, you've been dealing with it for 7, or say you're 23, you've been dealing with it for 7 years. Mm-hmm. That's a long time. And that's a lot of the memory portion of your life.
Totally.
So if we're not including, let's say, the first 5 years.
Totally.
So what changed? What happened, and where were you in life when you started to really figure out, I don't have this psychological condition?
Sure, yeah. So basically I was living in the city, New York City, and I wasn't feeling well. I was like catering. And I had heard about a doctor who takes a holistic approach to things. God, what is his name? He actually passed away some years ago from some surgery complications. But there is still a clinic in the city. But, this is a model that I think a lot of physicians have taken up. I think it's actually kind of the cool thing. Cool is kind of a weird word, but kind of the trendy thing to do now is approach medicine in a holistic manner. Mm-hmm. And I think it's, even though it's, whatever's trendy is a little annoying, but I think it actually can be very effective. So I went to him with chronic pain, chronic fatigue, those complaints, stomach pain, fatigue, depression. And he was like, all right, first thing we have to do is see what you're eating, right? Let's look at your diet. And basically took some blood work from me, I think. I went to go see him again for the blood results. And, it wasn't one of these clear-cut things with celiac where you get a endoscopy, they take a biopsy, and they analyze it. It wasn't one of those. It was I'm seeing some antibodies reacting to gluten in your blood. Stop the gluten, stop dairy. We're going to get you off this effexor, off the medication, and, let's hop to it, right? I was like,
sorry. When you heard like no more gluten, no more dairy.
Yeah.
Those are like big staples in the Western diet.
Oh yeah.
So what did you think about that?
I wasn't feeling well, so anything that would help, I was
Right.
like, 10, 100%, 10,000%, let's go, whatever we can do. But you're absolutely right that a lot of people, when they hear stop eating gluten, stop eating dairy, it's tough. It's tough for them. And it's not just a diet change. It can affect your social life. It can affect, lots of things, because you can't just go out and have a burger or have pizza anymore, right?
Yeah.
So no question. But I personally was like, I will do whatever it takes. And I actually remember eating a bagel that morning of getting the blood results and being like, you know what? Like, I get it. Like, I feel it, because I had my last bagel, like a New York bagel, everything bagel with like, cream cheese and lox, which sounds delicious to most of the world, which is terrifying for me at this point. And I remember feeling like, oh God, like, you know what? Like, I feel it. Like, there is something that's like messing with my head and my body. And so I remember that, like, kind of distinctly. And yeah, it was tough news. It was, but it's not cancer. It's not Crohn's disease, right? I mean, I was worried I had Crohn's. I was worried, there was a time where I was so concerned with my body. I was like, do I have HIV? I mean, like, it's not even, like, I was really like scared.
Yeah.
So if it's a simple diet change, which maybe isn't so simple, but I was okay with it.
Right.
I was like, let's do it, whatever you can do, type thing. So yeah.
So you gave it up?
So I gave it up. I did my research. It was a learning curve, no question. I didn't know that, soy sauce is 60% gluten, spirits, alcohol, lots of alcohols are, distilled from, rye or barley. So gluten, as far as I know, is wheat, rye, and barley. But, what the gluten protein is exactly, it's been a minute since I've kind of researched it, but it's not only wheat, right? It's also rye, it's also barley. And so, yeah, so, I had to, no more whiskey, no more, not that I drink whiskey, or I'm not really, bourbon, but, it's, in New York City, you're going out, bars. So lots of changes, even though at that point, honestly, I wasn't even drinking alcohol because my stomach was so messed up anyway, or it wasn't really doing an alcohol thing. But it's a big change. It's a big change, no question. And especially the dairy thing too. I don't eat dairy either. So, no, none of that stuff either. I did my research. You learn to look at labels. Be really intense about that stuff. I learned I'm so sensitive to cross-contamination as well. If it's even produced in a facility that has gluten, I can have a reaction.
Right.
And I also, and I learned that it's an autoimmune thing. It's not an allergy, right?
Yeah.
So
So for anyone who, I think I often don't like throwing my own thoughts into these episodes, but I think this is a really important point to make, where I can't speak for the rest of the world, but in North America, read what you're eating, people. Like, it's crazy how we don't know what we're putting into our body. We just eat stuff. We're like, yeah, it's food, I guess. Sure.
Oh, yeah.
Just like what you said, there's this learning curve. I have to start to realize, what is it that I'm actually consuming?
Totally.
Right?
Totally. Absolutely.
And how long did it take for you to start to see improvement?
Yeah. So, not long. I mean, it definitely wasn't overnight, and it's taken years, and I'm still on the journey. But the big thing for me was the chronic pain kind of subsided. That was the big thing for me. I still felt out of it, a little tired, a little out of it, but I remember it was kind of like I was high on something. My body, like, high is kind of a weird way to describe it. My body was like on something, on like a foreign substance, and that weight kind of lifted. I just felt weighed down by this thing, and I think my immune system was on overdrive. I think it was just like, really inflamed and just working real hard. And when I cut out the gluten and the dairy is less intense than the gluten. The gluten's the real kind of culprit. I had one doctor describe it to me as a neurotoxin, which I found really interesting. I'd end up going to all these doctors doing various types of therapies to help me, which I'm happy to get into as well. But it wasn't overnight. Absolutely not. And my body was still Like, okay, all right, now you got the crap out. Now we got to think about how, we can balance back out. So, yeah.
Yeah. So for anyone who's listening and doesn't understand what celiac is, like they're listening, they're like, okay, so, his body's reacting. He's got stomach aches. He's some nervous system stuff's going on. Can you describe to us what is celiac?
Sure. So, not a scientist, but I did a lot of reading. So as far as I know, celiac disease is an autoimmune disorder, I guess. Disease.
Which means what?
Which means that, so essentially, when you have celiac and when you consume gluten, when you consume these proteins, rye, barley, wheat, your immune system, it basically, it's like your body's being attacked by the gluten. So it's like, it looks at gluten and rye, and it looks at gluten as an enemy, as this kind of foreign thing that doesn't belong here, and your immune system kind of, turns on. So apparently, from what I've read and from what I've talked to some people, it's different for everybody, right? As far as I can tell, allergies have to do with histamine. If you're allergic to nuts or allergic to, and it's an allergy, you can go anaphylactic shock, or you can get hives, or, it's one of those, it's histamine related. Again, I'm not a doctor, or a scientist, although that would be very cool. So what I read, I remember reading that there are over, 200 symptoms of celiac disease? I mean, something remarkable. So everybody reacts differently to having celiac. Everybody's body reacts differently to having celiac disease. Some people don't really react that horribly to it physically, but their body is still reacting really negatively. And what I remember, from what I know, there are these little things in the gut, I think it's the lower intestine, called villi. These little hairs that essentially absorb nutrients. When you have celiac and when you're eating gluten, those little hairs that are absorbing all those vitamins and nutrients flatten out. So you're not absorbing those things the way that other people are.
Yeah. So for people who are listening, the importance of the villi cannot be understated. They are incredibly, incredibly, incredibly important. So imagine if instead of just taking the surface area of a football field, you also took the surface area of every blade of grass. Dramatically increases it. And so in celiac, if they're flattening out, what's happening is you're dramatically reducing the surface area that you can absorb stuff. And it makes sense why you're in so much pain, because if your body and the immune system is like, let me just destroy this part of your body.
Totally.
That doesn't feel very nice.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh God. Yeah, absolutely. No question. Yeah. So on top of everything, I also felt like I wasn't absorbing things, adequately. So that's as far as I can tell, that's my understanding. I see, like, my symptoms personally were very internally GI pain, and the neurological thing is just terrifying for me. And one of the thing that scares me to death about this thing that I have is that's why I'm, if you are my friend, you hang out with me, or, we go on a date or something, I'm annoying because I'm so annoying about gluten, because I'm so traumatized from it. I'm so terrified of it, because even if I get a little bit, it messes with my personality. It messes with my perspective, my neurology, like my mood. It's like a really scary thing. I don't know what other word, so that's why I'm like, I need you to wash your hands, and I don't want to go through, if there's bread, I'm like going that way. Like,
yeah, just keep me away from that.
Get me away. Yeah, exactly.
And so what was it like for you? How long did it take for your symptoms to basically clear up?
Sure. So, let's see. I think, the thing is, I remember after a year, I was not really in any pain physically anymore. I was still out of it, fatigued, things like that, but my stomach really wasn't hurting anymore. But
what was that like? Sorry to jump in.
No, you're fine. So it was great. I mean, my functioning kind of increased a little bit. I was able to do things. For most of my life, I wasn't able to go to a restaurant. I mean, even if it's gluten-free, I couldn't really sit there.
You sound very nonchalant about this. I just went through 7, 8 years of just like pain constantly. Yeah, I mean, it was kind of cool.
Yeah, no, it was great. I mean, the reason why I'm not like, because it wasn't so cut and dry. It wasn't kind of an overnight thing. Again, I'm 30. I was diagnosed when I was 25. I think it was summer when I was 24, going to when I was 25. It's only been 5 or 6 years, and I'm still I'm not 1,000%, right? So I'm still fighting. I'm still kind of doing what I have to do to feel balanced internally. I'm so much better, and that's due to lots of things that I'm happy. The weird various therapies that I've experienced, I don't know, they may have tweaked me in certain ways, alternative things that aren't conventional, Western stuff that I'm happy to share, obviously. But it's been a journey for me personally. I don't know what I'm sure there are people out there who have celiac, stop eating gluten, and things get better kind of immediately within 6 months to a year. That wasn't the case with me, right? I was still looking for answers. Even after the pain was subsided, I was still, smoking copious amounts of marijuana, still had other issues. My body was recovering, essentially.
Yeah. Can you tell me about some of those therapies that you tried?
Sure. No question. Yeah. So, there's a whole world out there of alternative therapies, some effective, some not probably. But, my folks are, God bless them, poured thousands of dollars into helping me, whatever they could do to help me. I remember, so I went to a doctor. I was getting intravenous vitamins and nutrients once every 2 weeks. I believe it was, what was it called? It's not coming to me. It's something, Myers cocktail or something like that. Okay. Something like that. And it's basically an infusion. You sit, with, it's a needle, it's an infusion. You sit with a bag of, a combination of like vitamin C, zinc, a bunch of things I don't remember exactly. And I got that once every 2 weeks. And, it was like, $500 a pop or $400 a pop or something like that. And it was, on some fancy clinic on the Upper East Side on Madison Avenue, with this doctor. But I think it helped. I think that I was so depleted and my body was so like not taking in nutrients in the right way orally. And I think I was still not doing well. That I think the infusions were helping. It was giving me some energy, helping my cognition. Most of the time my big complaint was chronic fatigue. My big complaint was just kind of feeling out of it. So I was taking, I was doing that. I was taking supplements, all these like various things, these adrenal support supplements. I don't know how effective they are. Long term, I don't know how bad they can be for you. But I was like, my adrenals like, pooped out, or what's going on here? So I did that for a minute. Stopped that. What else did I do? At some point, I did TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation. I don't know if you know what that is.
Based on the word, it sounds like around the head, you're using magnets, you're stimulating the brain, something like that.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, something like that. Totally. It's this technology that's been around since the 70s, 80s, but they've kind of refined it. And they use it mostly now. They use it, the one that I did for depression and anxiety, and, also not free. I remember that helping me a bit as well. I do remember it kind of overstimulating me almost in a sense, honestly. But I was, doing whatever I can. So I did that a little bit at, a psychiatrist's office that, he claims that TMS is the best thing since sliced bread. And honestly, it may be very effective. And I don't know what it did internally to my brain. It may have helped shift something in a positive way. But it wasn't like, kind of a magical solution for me.
Right.
No question. Another thing that I did, feel free to jump in at any point, is this thing called neurofeedback, which I think actually helped me immensely. So there's a whole slew of neurofeedback things out there, I believe. There's even ones that you can take home with you, kind of a one size fits all. That I don't know if I'd not recommend it, but that's not what helped me. I actually met a neurologist / psychiatrist. He's this Pakistani man. I've been going to the emergency room for GI stuff, last year, the year before that, the year before. Like, my journey wasn't over. Like, I was still having lots of stomach stuff, and it wasn't gluten related, right? It was psychosomatic related. In my opinion, at this point now, I'm realizing that it was largely marijuana related, actually. Weirdly enough, I was a chronic marijuana user, and I thought that it was helping my nausea. And maybe the TMS also tweaked something, maybe a little kind of my body a little bit. I would use even the word overstimulated in a sense, and maybe nauseous. But I was using marijuana very, very heavily, and essentially what happened was I ended up in the emergency room here in my local town in Westchester, New York, and he was on call. He was the emergency room psychiatrist on call. I guess sometimes they have a psychiatrist on call at the ER for psych issues. And he looked at me and he gave me his opinion about what's going on. And he has a little clinic in Bronxville, and I went to him, and he does this like EEG scan on me with like, the most modern technology. I sit in this chair, he does an EEG scan, and he looks at my brain. Which is where they scan
your brain, right?
Correct, which is where they scan your brain. I don't know how in-depth it is, but it seemed pretty in-depth, some 3D stuff going on, it was pretty neat. Basically told me, you need to stop using marijuana immediately or you're gonna mess yourself up. So I didn't fully listen to him because I, was stuck in my ways. But I kept using, and because he told me there was something specifically in my brain. It wasn't in everyone's brain. He's like, I don't have anything morally against cannabis. I wouldn't say this to everybody if I didn't think this was. So basically what he told me was, with my brain specifically, when I use marijuana, it slows down a certain part of my brain. And then when the marijuana wears off, there's kind of this rebound effect.
Right.
Yeah. And so that is affecting my nausea, essentially. It's everything's coming out in the stomach. So he does a combination of neurofeedback and TMS, but I think, my opinion internally is that the neurofeedback shifted something remote, immensely. It's something to do with brain waves, alpha, beta, things like that.
Can you tell us what neurofeedback is?
I can try.
Okay.
I can try. Yeah. It's a technology. I think it's a technology essentially that basically operates on our like alpha, beta, all these waves that we have in our brain that, I guess, have profound effects on our mood, things like that. But I don't, the truth is I don't really know in depth. I'm still I have tried to read about it, but I'm not, I don't think I could do it justice. He tried to explain it to me. There are a lot of technical terms involved, and it was kind of tough for me to wrap my head around it. At the time, I was just so kind of, wrapped up in myself and just wanting to get better that I kind of was just like, whatever helps. It seemed to have really shifted something in a very positive way for me, calming down certain parts of my brain and, not calming other, stimulating other parts. And I sat in this chair and, we kind of he put on music, and it's painless. So I feel like that may have helped me.
So I just did a quick little Google search here.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm just, in kinesiology, we did a lot of different things that had to do with the body. So this is my interpretation of a quick Google search of what I've seen here. Okay. You put this thing on your head, it maps your brain waves, it's connected to a computer. Your brain activity does something to the computer, and what you learn is how your thoughts impact the computer. Is that right? And then you start to kind of train your brain how to...
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that sounds right. It was
cool.
Totally. It sounds right because I'm still not 1,000% sure. Learning. I remember there was some beeping involved. Yeah. Totally.
Sure. And what would you say like the strangest therapy you tried was?
The strangest therapy I tried. Yeah. I don't know. Strange. I went to maybe the most ineffective, at least for me,
sure,
is what I realized, is I went to like a neuropath or something, not a neuropath, like a naturopath. I forgot what they're called.
A naturopath?
A naturopath, something like that. Yeah, an ND, so naturopath,
yeah.
Right? And Lots of supplements, lots of things of that nature, which kind of helped symptomatic, like help my symptoms like short term, but weren't really kind of doing it for me long term. And I was constantly popping, pills and taking powders and stuff like that. Not to knock any kind of, holistic, not to knock that approach at all. It's just, that seemed to be the most ineffective for me.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and where has this left you now?
Sure. Yeah. So, I stopped, marijuana use. I'm feeling better. I'm feeling good. It's left me, I'm in a much, much different place than I was, even 2 years ago. I will say I haven't gone to the emergency room once in like a year or something. ER sucks. Not fun. My stomach is feeling good. I'm eating. I like gained, a decent amount of weight. And I was, so it's left me, feeling hopeful. So you know what, let me jump in and say another therapy that I used, that I forgot to mention was, weirdly enough, psychedelic therapy. This is less so for kind of specifically geared towards my stomach, but it was more, kind of an overall mental health thing. And it's actually being used more and more, psychedelics.
What did you use?
Sure. So my first experience was, and by the way, this is, with a guide, quote unquote, a shaman, as they say in the community. And it's under, it's in a controlled setting. It's, it's not, fun, I guess, if you might say. I'm not going out and partying by any means.
Yeah. So just disclaimer for anyone listening.
Yeah.
We are not saying that you should go and do psychedelics. Please consult your doctor. Everything you hear on this podcast is entirely anecdotal. And with that out of the way, Gabe, please tell me about your experience.
My first experience was with MDMA, actually. And, I had this, I was like, I had experience in the past with what I thought was MDMA, but I don't actually think it was MDMA. I think it was probably cut with some other stuff and didn't make me feel good. And it just made me feel down and gross and all this kind of stuff. But I was like, you know what, I just need help. This was actually, I'd just been in the hospital for a couple of days for the stomach stuff. I was feeling super depressed, super down, because of the situation, sad, and just kind of hopeless almost. And, I had someone in my life that's very close to me. It's very dear to me, who's like really pushed me to do this, in a sense. Like, you need to do this. This is going to help you immensely. People have, dealt with their traumas and their depression in this way. And so I went and I did MDMA with this guide, shaman, who's a wonderful, wonderful person. And basically, I just felt like all the trauma, all the depression, all the crap boiled to the surface. And I had like a 3-4 hour like shaking and crying kind of situation. And, afterwards, when I came out of it, I felt so much better. It was really crazy, actually. I felt lighter. Lighter is like the overall word that I'd like to use when describing kind of the result, because I felt like just less burdened by all this internal trauma that you can't really access if you're not, it's tough to access these things in regular therapy. I probably should be going to therapy. I'm not in therapy, but I've had therapists. It's been tough for me. It's a very human relationship. It's hard to find someone that you trust and you click with and you find insightful enough and things of that nature. And, it's tough with the therapy thing. So so that was a wonderful, wonderful experience. Again, it wasn't fun. It wasn't easy. It was painful. It hurt. I mean, internally, emotionally, not physically or anything. I was also worried I was gonna get nauseous, right? And I didn't. I was good. Just sweating and crying and shaking, and it just kind of all boiled to the surface. And again, I was with somebody who was really holding a safe space for me and a kind of a controlled environment with wonderful people. So I wouldn't recommend you just go and do this, because I don't think that if those people were there and if this person wasn't there for me in the way that it was set up, that I would have had the same result. That kind of, that safe environment, that like cocoon of, safety, and that I'm able to be vulnerable in that sense, was such an integral part of this therapy, in my opinion, in the way they approach this therapy. And so I did that a couple times. I did it a few times, actually. And once recently, actually, I did a little bit of what they call ayahuasca, which is a root they find in South America.
And what was your ayahuasca experience like?
Yeah, so that was also beautiful. It wasn't, I didn't do the traditional tea. It was actually with a chocolate, a special made chocolate.
Okay.
Don't ask me how. Yeah. Someone's, there's a whole world out there apparently of people, administering these things in various ways. And this was, I took a bit of a chocolate, and it was also mixed with psilocybin as well. Oh, those are
Yeah.
magic mushrooms for those
Yeah,
people.
so you had mushrooms and ayahuasca at the same
It was
time.
a little bit of a mix, correct. You got it.
Okay.
They actually call it maha. Yeah, I believe it's called maha. And that was my first experience with those psychedelics. I was worried it was going to be a whole thing. And it wasn't. It was very gentle, very calming, very grounding. I didn't feel like stoned or high or like party, none of that. I had some visuals, no question, but it wasn't crazy. And honestly, it was like hour number 5 or 6 where like I really started having thoughts of, kind of insights, I guess, in a sense. And they weren't, again, I just want to emphasize how not intense it was, because I was concerned about that. And maybe it was because it was in a chocolate and not a tea, and potentially the amount. But I think, as far as I can tell with ayahuasca, really it almost has a mind of its own. It adjusts to your body, to everybody's brain and everybody's body in its own way. And I know it's kind of a weird thing to say, but people will attest to that. They will attest to it. And I had a beautiful experience. I just felt very open and thinking about things that I hadn't thought about internally, and felt comfortable. Went to like my parents' room, because I did this here at their house. I live with them, moving out soon, which is great. But I was at their house with this guide, and it was like 2 a.m, and I went to their room, and we had this very kind of grounding, not weird, very straightforward, very wonderful, lovely conversation about my crap, my trauma, how appreciative I am of them, how I know it's been tough. Essentially conversations that I couldn't really, I don't think I'd be able to have it in that way. I think the more and more I do it, I've only done it once, but the more and more you practice this level of vulnerability, the easier it will get, right? I just kind of open the door for it.
I can absolutely attest to that, not to the ayahuasca, but to the opening up. And the more you practice this vulnerability, and really it's like you're candid, you're honest, there's no BS. It's just like, look, I friggin' so appreciate you.
Totally.
And how was that? Like, did they know you were doing ayahuasca? And like,
they did. Yeah, they did.
Okay.
So my mother is actually the one who kind of started doing it a couple years ago. And that's how we've kind of figured it out. And she's actually very open with it. She's a psychotherapist, and she's a big proponent of it at this point. And it's helped her deal with her own trauma immensely. And so she kind of brought me into this world, and because she was just like, oh, this is going to help you. And I was a little, resistant to it, because I was like, oh, am I going to take mushrooms? Like, I did that when I was 16. This is ridiculous. And I didn't, but it's been really, really, really helpful. And so, they knew, and I went up to their room, and we had a beautiful conversation, and that, and it's been only positive since then, really. I mean, obviously we had one or two, various arguments, but I'm still their kid, and that's still going to be the dynamic, but I do feel a lot more comfortable around them, and, find that there's a lot of strength in being vulnerable, if you can be vulnerable. A lot of strength in it, a lot of power in that level of vulnerability, especially with your parents. It's not an easy thing, parents and offspring dynamic. It can be tough. Yeah, it's been a very positive experience for sure.
Good. That's incredible. And that advice, or what you just said, I just so resonate with that. There's a lot of strength in vulnerability when you realize that, this is true strength. Holding up those incredibly hard shells and putting up all our barriers and shutting all the doors, that, while it feels secure, it feels strong, it's like this false sense of strength and security, right?
Absolutely. No question.
So Gabe, what has this done for your life? And I want to start wrapping up here.
Sure.
But if you had to put it into this, just a nice little box, nice little package for us, what has this entire journey done for you?
Yeah. Wow. I think it's, clichéingly, that's not a word, but I'm making it one. Made me who I am, in a sense that I feel like I'm raw in a sense. Than more than other people. I like to kind of cut through, the fluff, and it's made me a person that's just it's also made me very gracious, I would say. Give me a lot of gratitude for things. Even though have come from a good family, we're fine financially, and my parents are lovely people. It's made me very, very gracious for my parents, for my situation, for my body, for my health. I'm just very grateful for all those things, and I think that's a very powerful thing, is being grateful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. People who are listening to this, I just closed my eyes and said, yeah. Would you say that you're grateful for the struggle that you've had?
I don't know. It is what it is. This is the way that things have unfolded in my life, right? So there's no other way to be. And there's no question that trauma, and can make somebody dig deep and grow up fast, in a sense, emotionally. There's no question. And so, and I do think that I connect well with people who have had to dug deep, who've had to, look in the mirror, or, have to take a step back. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, there's definitely something to being grateful for, having to do that, to take a step back and to dig deep and to, reflect and, be distracted by, again, clichéingly, again, not a word, but I'm making it one, superficial things, I guess, in the world, and ego and, arrogance or whatever, whatever, maybe whatever things that I look at as fluff. I personally, it's made me that, in a sense. I don't know if my life had gone a different way, if this would have taken me longer, or, whatever, who knows? But, here we are. And, yeah,
So it's made you attentive to the important things. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a good summary. Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Last question I have for you is, what advice would you give to someone who finds themselves struggling with their own process, not necessarily celiac, but they find themselves in a struggle? They're climbing their mountain. What advice would you give to someone?
Yeah, I think it's really important one is, sometimes I tell these to the patients at the hospital. I think acceptance is a big part of healing. I think that a lot of the times you're fighting this uphill battle, and it's going to be really tough. But I think it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of self-reflection, self-examining, identifying what's going on, and also accepting that, maybe you might be in a little bit of pain for a little bit. And that's okay. That's okay. But, you have to hold on to the strength, and it's going to be okay. And there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It's just a matter of getting there, and it's not going to happen overnight. It's a process, and I'm still it's a lifelong process for everybody, right? But for people who are dealing with, any kind of chronic thing that's constantly, they're constantly battling, that's going to be an even a bigger process, and a more intense process. But know that it is a process, it is a journey, and it's a bigger picture thing, right? You're going to have to look at the bigger picture. So yeah, that's kind of my advice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
As always, I want to turn the attention to you as the listener. What are you going to do in your life? What is the challenge that you're currently experiencing? And you've just spent the last hour with us experiencing Gabe's story. And congratulations for doing that, for taking the time to fill your mind with things that are going to move you towards your goals. And now here comes the point where action is required. And what action are you going to take in your life to help move you towards your goals, so that the you of tomorrow is better than the you of today?
Totally. A big thing for me. So big picture, I want to be a therapist, a social worker of sorts. Still figuring out the nuances of that. Currently work at a psychiatric hospital with adolescents. And I've actually always wanted to do that. I've always wanted to be a therapist. But I've just had, issues, obviously, getting there. And I'm here, and I'm not here. I'm not in social work school yet, but I'm applying for an MSW for next fall. And it feels good. Things are coming to fruition. They're coming to the surface. They're coming to reality. Even, I'm 30 at this point. And I started, undergrad when I was 25. Everything kind of started late for me, by society's, whatever agenda. But it's, a big thing for me is, so just putting one foot in front of the other. Exercise is huge for me. It could be bigger, but it's something that's important to me. I'm constantly moving, getting up in the morning as self-disciplined as I can be, and, doing my pull-ups, doing my squats, need to get more cardio in, don't, sometimes trying to get some yoga and stretching, that kind of stuff, keeping the body, even when I wasn't feeling well, exercise was still something that was really helpful for me. And just, doing the best that I can, being as focused as I can in order to accomplish this dream of being, a successful therapist, and helping people deal with whatever struggles they're having emotionally, physically, all those things.
Yeah. Amazing. Gabe, thank you so much for being here with me today. Thank you for sharing your story with me, with all of our listeners. Absolute pleasure, absolute honor.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so next week we'll be back with another episode, Saturdays, 10 a.m. Eastern. Come join us live, be a part of our discussion, be a part of it. Thank you so much, and see you then.
Thanks, everyone.